The waning moon is here, and it is that time of the month again. As the light of the moon dwindles down, we become more receptive to the energies around us as well as to our own unconscious minds, making this the perfect time to do some shadow work. But a question that I get asked a lot is from people who feel pulled towards this kind of work, but they just don't know what to do. So, whether you are newer to shadow work or you are just looking for some ideas to add to your already existing shadow work practice, we'll be talking about all of this and more in tonight's episode. So, merry meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and tonight we're here talking about the waning moon and shadow work. So, welcome to those who are joining us live. You can go ahead and say hi in the chat so that we know that you're here. You can also leave a questions and comments as we will have a Q&A at the end. So just saying hi to a few that I see in the chat. Welcome, Joanne is here, and Rebecca. And Rebecca said there's an echo. Okay, so let me know, is it still continuing on? I may have to restart the broadcast if that's the case. Just let me know how the sound is, because unfortunately I'm not able to hear it on my end. So guys, just let me know how the sound is, if I should continue or if I should try to start the broadcast over. All right. So if you like what you hear during the video, of course, leave a heart or a thumbs up. Kurt said there's no echo on his end, so if anybody else could let us know. So people are saying it sounds good. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and continue. Okay. All right, so we have a lot to cover tonight. So I'm going to start with talking about a bit about the current lunar cycle, which of course will apply to any waning moon that we are in. So right now we are in the waning moon, in particular the waning crescent moon. This is the waning half of the cycle. It's broken up into two main parts, but also other subdivisions as well. So we have the waning gibbous, which takes place from full to third quarter moon. And we also have the waning crescent, which takes place from the third quarter all the way to the new moon. So currently we are in the waning crescent. But there are also subdivisions of the waning crescent, which include the balsamic moon, which is the final 72 hours of the cycle. So if you are watching this video live or watching it tonight within the next 24 hours or so, we are entering the balsamic moon tomorrow, Wednesday, March 26th. And that will last all the way to the end of the cycle. And then, of course, the dark moon is the very final day of the cycle in this particular cycle that is going to be on Friday, March 28th. And then the new moon will begin on Saturday, March 29th. So the dark moon, as we approach the dark moon, one of the things that we notice is that the veils slightly thin. It's not the same thinning of the veils that we're going to experience at Samhain or even at Beltane. There's some thinning of the veils then as well, but there is this slight thinning of the veils as we transition from one cycle to the next. This helps to explain why people tend to feel more receptive. They may be drawn towards inward work. They may notice that their dream experience is heightened. Many people may become more aware of the synchronicities that are around them. They may become more aware of messages that are coming through to them from guides. They may feel pulled, as I said, pulled inward towards inward kind of work. People may find that they need more sleep and more rest. And so if that is you, in your case, if you feel like you're lower in energy right now and you are watching this right now, try to see if you can gift yourself that space. I've talked about this before. We live in a world that sort of demands us to, never take breaks, to show up at the same way every single day, no matter how we feel. And the reality is, as the lunar cycle changes, so does our own energy change. And so we can't show up the same exact way every day of the cycle. And so if you are in a space where you can gift yourself the rest and you feel that you need it, your body feels pulled towards it, see if you can allow yourself to have that time. People may experience more of a desire to be alone right now during the waning crescent moon. So if that's the case for you, it's okay to turn down the invitations. You don't have to push yourself to do things that you don't necessarily want to do. See if you can really lean into your self care, especially if you're feeling low on energy. Your intuition and your awareness may also heighten during this time. You may find that you are more emotional than usual. And you may also find that it's easier to get into the flow state. So there's, you can see there are positive sides to this, and there's what people might consider negative sides, but they can all be managed if we know how to manage our energy and we know how to match our energy to the universal energy around us. So as we get closer to the dark moon, you may also sense that your body wants to release in some way, whether that release is a physical release or an energetic release. Or an emotional release. It could be crying. But you may notice that your mind or your body or both want to let go of something. However, our conscious mind can often resist this process. Again, there's many reasons why that could occur. Number one is just simply the world that we live in, where the the demand on us is so great that we're not really afforded that space to let go, right? To slow down and be able to let go. So you're consciously or unconsciously, you may hold back, you may resist. Now, this creates a tension in both the physical and the energetic body. If the body and the energetic body wants to let go, and yet we're not allowing it to, we're going to create tension. And in some ways, we can think of this as like a good synonymous process is PMS. So when people experience PMS, a lot of times what it has to do is the body is getting ready to release, to shed its lining, and we may be clutching, we may be holding on to something, and we create, and this tension is created in our body. So whether this is unconscious or conscious, we have this building up of tension in the body that eventually gets eased when the body is finally allowed to release. So if you notice that in your energetic body, if you notice a lot of tension building up, see if you can let go, you can lean into the process and aid it rather than fight against it. Now, this is also why shadow work can be so beneficial, especially at this time, because it, again, it assists in that process of working through things, of letting go of things, letting go of the hold that certain things may have on us. So I'm just going to pause for a moment to say hi to those who are joining us. So I see that Rebecca's saying there's still an echo for her, but others are saying it's okay. And then Rebecca said it corrected itself anyway. Okay, so Rebecca said she's been experiencing needing more sleep and having less energy. Yeah, and so it's very, very common, especially at this time of the cycle. And so sometimes we resist that too, right? And that's just going to make things worse. And so there's even like these theories that, so going back to the menstrual cycle, is that when people start to feel that feeling at the end of their cycle and they resist it and they push through it and they go, that can be what creates a lot of the tension because we're not aiding our body in the process, right? So the same goes for all of us as we move towards the dark moon and into these, final few days of the cycle, is how can we aid the process of shedding something energetically, shedding something emotionally, so we're not fighting against it. So when Rebecca says needing more sleep, having less energy, hopefully you're able to give yourself that, and you'll probably find that the process is much easier than if you're not able to give yourself that. And Kurt said it always happens to him when the time rolls forward. So like time change. Yeah, so the time change, yeah, that is, it's hard on the system, right? So we would think that just 1 hour of time difference wouldn't make all that big a difference, but it really, really does. Yeah, it can really jar us and throw us off for several weeks sometimes. Rebecca said she's about to take a nap. Yeah, or she's about taking naps. Yeah, so yeah, this is a good time for napping. It's a good time for slowing down, a good time for kind of reflection. We're going to be talking a lot about other things that we can do to aid our shadow work as well. Yeah, just marry me to all those joining us, who I didn't say hello to earlier, Amy and Kurt and Stephanie, Andrea, Sonia, hi everybody. Shannon, Stephanie, Merry meet, everybody, and Glitter's also here. Merry meet. Okay, so let us just talk a little bit about what shadow work is for those who don't know, anybody who's joining us kind of for the first time, or this is newer stuff, and then we'll dive into some ideas of how you could work with this energy of the waning moon in your shadow work, including some ideas I've shared before and including some ideas that I haven't shared before. So shadow work allows us to reclaim the splintered or the rejected parts of the self. So it's important to remember that the process of this is all natural. So the process of the splintering of the self is natural, and the rejected parts of the self are usually rejected early on in our lives. Oftentimes when we're very little, before we even know what's going on, we are taught what is okay and what's not okay by the people around us, by caregivers, people at school, friends, peer groups. If you belonged to a church or a religious community, you would be taught different things that are okay and not okay there as well. And so what we do is we suppress those parts of us that we deem not acceptable. We push them off into the shadows where they remain. We see them outside in the world, in other people and in other situations. But in order to be a good person, we feel that we can't have those qualities. But the reality is that we are multifaceted. We are not just all good qualities. And just so we know, these are not necessarily bad qualities, they're just qualities, right? So if we have aggressiveness within us, if we have jealousy within us, if we have judgment, right, these are natural states for the human being to have. And if we reject them, all we ever do is we see them in other people. It creates a lot of tension in us. If we're instead able to explore them and embrace them, discover where they came from, they lose their hold on us. So the idea is that it takes so much energy to keep this part of ourselves away from us, at bay in the shadows. And to me, that's energy I would much rather be spending on things like elevating my soul progression and my spiritual journey, working on my intuition, right? We only have so much energy, and we can divvy it out into certain tasks and areas of our lives. And if a big portion of it is going to keeping your shadow at bay, well, that's energy you could probably spend more usefully somewhere else. So, Carl Jung, who many call the godfather of shadow work, he believed that this work was truly the only way that a person could find absolute health and well-being and happiness and wholeness. So I don't like extremes like that. I think that there are many pathways to enlightenment, but this is an accessible one. People who do regular shadow work, and we'll talk at the end about some of the benefits that people who do this regularly experience, but I'll just mention a few here. People who do this regularly find the burdens lifted off their shoulders in a lot of ways. It doesn't take all your problems away, but it shifts your perspective about them. And so if you truly want profound healing, then this is definitely a modality through which you can find it. Okay, so let's talk about what we can do to do shadow work. So one of the biggest questions I get asked is people they've heard, well, I should be doing shadow work, or here's this thing that a lot of people are doing, and they just don't know how to do it. And so I'm going to share with you, I think it's 10 different methods tonight that you can use in your shadow work journey. These methods are all very good for right now at the waning part of the lunar cycle, but they can be, shadow work, just like anything, can be done at any time. It's just that people tend to be a little bit more receptive towards it right now, a little bit more drawn to it, and that's why it can be on people's minds. So let's start with the very first one, which is usually the go-to answer, is exploring your triggers. So you, and also I'm just going to pause for a moment, because if the word trigger is triggering to you, sometimes people don't like the word trigger. So you can insert, instead of the word trigger, you can insert like the things that irk you, the things that annoy you, the things that irritate you, things that get under your skin, that make you grit your teeth, right? Any of these things. So you want to explore these things, and you will often find that these are places that you are ready to explore and possibly heal. So everything that causes a ripple in your water, right, has an opportunity to help you explore something about yourself. And it is important to remember shadow work is work. It's work for us. It's not work for other people. Other people will have to do their own shadow work. You don't do shadow work so that you can fix other people or problems with other people. What you will notice is that as you do your own shadow work, is just your own kind of way of being, and the way you relate to other people changes and shifts. But we're not here to do their work for them. But anything that you notice that you kind of feel irked and irritated about is a possibility. It's a place where you could explore it, and you could possibly go deeper. So you want to think about the situation, and you want to see if you can remove the external of that situation. So this is one that's coming to the top of my head. It's not a very deep one. So it's just, suppose that you are somebody who gets well, I'll say it's me. So I get really upset when people kind of exhibit road rage towards me, and especially if people are being like impatient at, like, when they're turning like if I'm at a place, an intersection where I can turn, and let's say there's a pedestrian in the walkway and I'm doing the right thing, giving the pedestrian space, and then this person's mad at me behind me, or laying on the horn, or speeding around all crazily, it really, really irritates me. So the important thing is, if I want to explore this in my shadow work, is I want to remove the external. So what it does is, it doesn't take away what the people are doing, but we sort of have to remove them. We have to turn the mirror back on ourselves and ask us, well, what could it be telling us about me? What can it be telling me about me that I'm getting upset when people are being impatient at me for giving other people space, right? So I start to contemplate that, and I can also begin to trace it back. Like, are there other places in my life that maybe are not connected to travel or driving where I feel a similar feeling? And we see how far we can trace it back. We can think about how far back can I trace it? See if we can find the origin. Even just the simple act of contemplating this, even if we don't get a lot of answers at first, just the simple fact of contemplating it can start to shift things for you. We've removed the other person, and we're instead using it as a way for our own growth. So thinking about the emotions it might bring up in us, thinking about the connections to the past it might bring up for us, connections to other things in the present, so other situations that are happening right now that may also connect to this situation. And you will gain insight over time into these areas of your life. Now, the one thing that I want to mention, sorry, I've got like kind of bad allergies today. The one thing that I do want to mention about this is that when you, let's say you have a trigger, like me and the people honking at me, or getting road rage at me for allowing people space, I may not come up with the answer right away. So that is the important thing to remember about shadow work, is just if you kind of think about it and you don't immediately come up with a clear answer, don't despair. It's not the kind of work that is often immediate. Sometimes it will be very immediate. You'll know exactly where it came from. Other times it won't. And so you have to be patient with that. And you can explore it for a while, and maybe eventually you just let it rest. Maybe you come up with a little bit of a solution. Maybe you trace it back a little bit, but you never come up with an exact answer of why it bothers you so much. And perhaps you return to it on the next dark moon, or the next waning moon. Or perhaps you return to it just at another time. All of a sudden the trigger happens again. And then you start to contemplate it again, and now you have enlightenment. So I guess where I'm going with this one is, you have to be patient when you do this kind of work. Patient if the answers don't come immediately. If you jot this down in a shadow work journal, that this is something that's kind of bothering me, I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, I really firmly believe that you will come up with answers eventually. It just may not be right away. And so you just want to manage your expectations. And again, it's soul kind of work like this takes time. So let's see. Chelsea said pet peeves would be another alternative word for triggers. Yeah, very good. That's a good one too. Yeah, anything that you would consider a pet peeve, like the things that get under your skin, they're not horrible, horrible things, but they bother you for some reason, and maybe they don't bother other people. So that's why we're trying to explore, why do they bother us so much, right? Okay, so the next idea is kind of related, and then we'll get into other ideas that are a little bit more active. This is another sort of introspection one. So, introspection, meditation, shadow journaling with prompts. Carl Jung called this active imagination. So it's just the process of contemplating your life, contemplating things that bother you. So instead of waiting for the trigger to happen to kind of initiate the shadow work session, you start to contemplate something like why do I always do this? Why do I always feel this way? So things that are good to contemplate are situations in your life where you ask yourself, why does this always happen to me? Why do I always feel this way? That word always is important there. One of the things that I recommend is if you don't have a lot of things, maybe you're newer to this, you don't have as much insight into sort of the workings of your shadow self yet, you can use the prompts. So there are shadow work prompts all over the internet, and you can Google shadow work prompts and you will find hundreds of them. And people often ask me what is the best one to use, and I would just say pick a couple that you're drawn to and allow those to be the ones that you work with. They give you a jumping off point rather than to have to come up with the trigger or come up with the problem yourself. They provide it for you, and through that, you begin to explore what's going on. So it's important to be relaxed when you do this. I'm going to mention yin yoga in a little bit, but getting into like a really relaxed position. I like to go out walking when I'm doing this because walking tends to kind of get the wheels of the mind moving. It can also put you into a flow state. The more receptive you are, the better that the experience turns out to be because you're basically letting go of sort of the ego and the conscious blockages that you might have towards exploring deeper aspects of yourself. So you kind of find yourself in a really, really comfortable place, right? So whatever that means for you. And then you start to meditate or contemplate these prompts. You know, what's the answer to this question? So one of the questions, one of the biggest prompts that people will use are what irks or irritates or annoys you the most. But there are other ones you can ask yourself, like who are you jealous of? Can be a good one if you feel like jealousy is something that you struggle with. What are the things that you are most afraid of if you're feeling brave enough to explore that one? So what I recommend is go online, grab yourself a couple of prompts, especially if you feel like you're ready to do a shadow work session, and then just start thinking. And again, just like the first idea with the triggers, you have to give yourself patience, meet yourself with grace, right? Because the answers may not come immediate. And I mentioned this in a couple of episodes recently, so it's a theme that keeps coming up, is that we live in a world that's kind of demanding answers all the time, right? Everything's at our fingertips, but there isn't like magic Google to go to answer questions about your shadow work. Like, why do I feel angry every time this person says this, right? There isn't going to be a Google for that, and there aren't quick answers sometimes. So again, giving yourself grace, finding your way to a more patient state can test you greatly, right? But also is the way that you'll open up and be more receptive to this kind of work. Now, also, if there is something that is already bothering you, you don't necessarily have to go to the prompts if you already have a question, right? So for me, one of the questions I've been exploring recently, and I know that the answer is here because I'm thinking about it. So anytime you're starting to think about these questions, you're close to getting the answer. But I'm also willing to work with this, realizing that it could take weeks or months before I actually get the full answer. But I've been trying to figure out why when I do big presentations or things like that, or recently we've been doing some in-person rituals at a shop in Burbank, and afterwards I always feel like really bad. When I should be feeling really good, but I end up feeling really bad. And I feel like my performance could have been better. There's probably some perfectionism in all of that, but I've begun to sort of trace that back, and I see myself back when I did a lot of performance in my band. I would feel that way after my shows, and I traced it further back to like when I was in middle school and high school. I played soccer, and it didn't matter if I scored 4 goals, I would still feel this way afterwards. So I'm going to continue working with this, tracing these feelings and these ideas back to see if I can find the earliest origin and hopefully figure out where it all comes from, right? So our goal here is to gain the insight. The insight is what relieves us of it doesn't take the problems away, but it's going to shift the way that we think about them. This is where we start to find freedom, because once we know where it's coming from, we get to choose whether we engage in the feeling or not. So right now, it's just, this is a feeling that descends upon me. You probably have similar feelings as well. Not necessarily about this maybe, but about other things. A feeling that just sort of descends on you in certain situations, and you don't know where it comes from. But once we understand where it comes from, that's where we gain the freedom. Okay, so I mentioned that I would talk about yin yoga. So yin yoga is a way that you can stimulate shadow work. I love it a lot. For those who have never done yin yoga before, it's much different than traditional yoga. Usually you lie or sit in a very comfortable position for upwards of 3 to 5 to sometimes 7 to 10 minutes. During that time, your physical body releases a lot of tension, which means that your energetic body also is allowed to release tension. And it allows us to get closer to the mental and the emotional body, which is where shadow work takes place. So once we can get to those areas, we become more receptive. So what I like to do is combine kind of the prompting or the contemplation with yin yoga, or like I mentioned, walking, something that's going to relax me enough that I get into that receptive space. So you can do yin yoga prior to your shadow work, or you can kind of just, and in the midst of that, your yin yoga can turn into a shadow work session. So it's not unusual for people to begin to cry during yin yoga sometimes as their body is releasing like tension they've been holding. It may have been there for quite some time. You may not even know where the emotions are coming from or why they're there, and it really doesn't matter. It's a cathartic release one way or the other. But sometimes you can also use the shadow work prompts while you are in the poses, and then you combine the two together. So like I always want to tell people is don't be afraid of those very intense emotions. You want to really lean into them rather than lean away from them, because this is the kind of work that you're choosing to do. So I would recommend, if you've never done yin yoga before, I would just Google yin yoga and see if there's a couple of yin yoga poses, and you're going to see pictures of them and some instructions on how to get into them. And that can be very helpful. I really like, one of my teachers is Brett Larkin, and she has a YouTube channel where she's got a lot of free yoga videos, and she's got some yin yoga on there as well. There's another yoga teacher, her channel is called Yoga with Cassandra, and she's also got some excellent yin yoga videos. For those who are in our Shadow Seekers membership, we have some yin yoga videos, and I'm in the process of making even more that are very good for when you're wanting to do your shadow work, if you want to combine yin with shadow work. Okay, so let's talk about shadow work visualization. And I see Sabrina's also joined us, Mary Meet. So shadow work visualization. So this is where we imagine personifying our shadow as a separate being than ourselves. And what this allows us to do is, of course, at the end of the day, this is us, and we are looking for wholeness. So we're looking to integrate the shadow back into our own personality. But for this exercise, it can be helpful to sort of separate the shadow away from us so that we can dialogue with it. So you can have a conversation with any aspect of yourself. So let's suppose that there is maybe a negative quality about yourself that you're aware of. A lot of times we don't like to admit it, but we know deep inside, we have these qualities. Remember, everybody has them, right? It's not just you alone. And so you may think of a more negative quality that you have. So one that comes to mind is like judgment. And we want to believe that we are non-judgmental. And there are people who are definitely more judgmental and less judgmental. But judgment is something that many of us carry. We judge certain things, right? And so let's use that as an example. So what you can do is you can have a conversation with that aspect of yourself. Like, why do I judge this person in this situation? Or why do you, I guess we're turning it back on them. So why do you judge this person in this situation? And then you allow, during this sort of meditative kind of visualization exercise, you allow the shadow, your other, to answer and give their perspective of where does the judgment come from? Why is the judgment there? What purpose does it serve? And your goal, your job as you, is to listen to their perspective, the other side of you, with compassion, right? Without judgment, and listen with compassion. You will learn through this process about your shadow. You'll learn a great deal about your shadow, and hopefully you'll also learn what your shadow can tell you about why these qualities exist. At the end of all of this, we're trying to figure out the why. Why does this exist within me? Why do I have these feelings? Why do I have these qualities that I'd prefer to hide? Why do I keep this part of me kind of blocked away from other people? So again, that's the freedom, is once we answer the question why and we understand where it comes from, now we know. Now we get to choose whether or not we engage or we don't. So probably the major thing to take home message here is that you do not want to push away the negative qualities. We want to understand them. So I believe very firmly that a lot of the hate and the bigotry and the unacceptance that we see in people around us, and we see more and more of it every day, I think that's a lot of people who have not done their shadow work, and they got a lot of shadow work to do. So rather than do their shadow work, they project it all out onto other people who become the targets of their own internal rage. So when you do your shadow work, what you will notice is you will become less interested and focused on what other people are doing. And that's a good thing because you are here to work on yourself. Again, like I said in the beginning, your shadow work isn't about other people's shadow work, it's only about yours. So you'll become more focused on yourself and how to improve yourself than being focused on what other people are doing. All right, so let us talk about the next idea, which is the shadow dance. So the shadow dance is very similar to intuitive movement, but it has this idea of connecting to the shadow. So let me just back up and explain what intuitive movement is. It's a great exercise for anybody who especially wants to work with the sacral chakra. If you're trying to work on intuition, intuitive movement can be very good as well. So what you do in intuitive movement is you turn on some relaxing music, close your eyes, and you allow your body to move in whatever way it wants to move. Now, this can be easy for some people and it can be very difficult for others. It kind of depends on where you are and how free you feel in the way that you move. But what you will notice is you will begin to work out kinks and places in your body that may be holding on to energy, trauma, clutching things, right? Holding it in the energetic body. You'll start to let go of some of that. It's not unusual, like in yin yoga, it's not unusual for people to begin to cry or to weep during intuitive movement as they let go of the things that are really holding them back. And it reminds me of this is going back probably almost 2 years ago. We had a member who she crossed through the veils about a year ago in April of 2024. And I remember when she first came to our group was sometime in probably late 2022, early 2023. And she was listening to one of these Ask Aislins, and afterwards, and we were talking, I think it was something about the sacral chakra, and afterwards she decided to do this intuitive movement. And she said that it released so much in her that she didn't realize that she was carrying, that she wept and wept and wept. And afterwards, she felt so free, like she had had the most cathartic session just from that one practice. So it really can be a game changer for people, especially if you're somebody who's like holding a lot of tension in your body. So you just close your eyes, put on some music, and just let your body move. Close the door, make sure other people aren't watching. Anybody that's going to make you feel self-conscious, this is all about you, and just really let yourself go. So let's talk about shadow dance. Now, shadow dance is very similar to intuitive movement, but it has a different sort of goal. The goal here is to connect to the shadow. And so what you want to do is you want to give your shadow a way to express itself physically. So you move your body in a way that helps it express the wilder, the darker, the more suppressed or the more primal parts of you. So the music that you may put on for shadow dance could be the same kind of music you put on for intuitive movement. It could also be darker music. It could be heavier. It could be faster. It's really whatever you feel drawn to. You allow the movements to be unrestrained. So again, we don't want people watching. So you want to close the door. You want to make sure you have the privacy to really get into this. Release your pent up emotions. You can get angry. If you want to punch pillows during it, if you want to like kick the air, punch just make sure you got enough space that you don't kick a wall or something. But the goal here is to really to release those pent up parts of you, and just really let the shadow dance. Imagine that you are the shadow as you are moving through this exercise, and you're just really letting the shadow physically express itself. Merry meet to Jamie, who also is joining us. So, and if anybody has any other ideas of ways that if they've done any of these things before, let us know what the result was. And if you, of course, have other ideas, we'd love to hear from you as well. So let's now talk about inner child work. So inner child work is very good when we are working with the shadow. The idea behind this is that the inner child was there when your shadow was formed. So even if your ego doesn't understand where all of this came from, your inner child does. And so when we can befriend the inner child, we create a powerful ally on the shadow work journey. So I love doing inner child work as part of shadow work. Inner child work itself can be its own kind of healing process, but when we combine it into shadow work, we make it that much more powerful. I recommend that people take inner child dates. That is one of my favorite things. So an inner child date, if you've never done one before, is you take your inner child with you to a place that they really want to go. So this opens up a lot of opportunities for you as adults. I firmly believe that we stay young if we play. I think that we shouldn't put things below us by saying, oh, those are child things. I think that number one, you can really help to heal your inner child by engaging in these kinds of things, but it also keeps you young. So inner child date could be any place that like your child wants to go now, any place that your inner child was not allowed to go as a kid. Maybe something that you remember that you loved, or something that you remember that you always wanted. Take yourself to a toy store, which there are fewer and fewer of those. Toys R Us going out of business was very sad because it was, at least for me, that was a place that I loved as a kid. What a great place to take your inner child. But you can find another toy store. You can go to the ice cream parlor. You can go get some candy. Take your inner child horseback riding. Anything that you wanted to do as a child that you didn't have the opportunity to do, or that you remember very fondly. Those are all good places for inner child dates. So inner child work there's many facets to it. This is just one very small facet of it. But again, as you befriend the inner child, you will find that they are more able and receptive to help you. I think you'll also find that your memory, as you start to trace back like where your present shadow work is, you try to trace it back into the past, you'll find that your memory is better because you are befriending the inner child. In our Shadow Seekers membership, we're spending all of April on inner child work. We haven't done this in like 2 years, so I'm really excited to be doing it. And I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for people to heal. But of course, even if you are not in Shadow Seekers, you can still work with your inner child. Another thing you can do, it's also another great way to work with the inner child, is to do non-dominant writing. So so basically what you do is you ask your child questions in your dominant hand. So for me, that's the right hand. So I would write, questions to the inner child, and then you put the pen or the pencil in your left hand, in my case, left hand, or your non-dominant hand, and you would see what answers come out through the non-dominant hand. And you kind of deciding that the non-dominant hand will be the voice of your inner child. Sometimes the child doesn't want to speak in words. They want to draw or to color or things like that. You can even do art projects with your inner child and see what comes out of that. So another thing we can do is work with the archetypes. So archetypes are symbols and patterns that exist in the collective unconscious. So this is something that we all have access to. They are unchanging across most cultures, and they're usually unchanging across time periods as well. So identifying the archetypes that you embody can be very helpful. Now, there are over 300 different archetypes that have been identified by psychoanalysts. Some of them are variations of the main 12 that Carl Jung talked about. All archetypes have a shadow side, and that is where you can begin to do some shadow work. It opens up spaces where you can do your work. So, for example, there is the one archetype is the ruler, and it has different variations like the king and the queen. But that ruler, what in its goodness, its infinite goodness, rules a kingdom and is fair and is judicial and is kind to all of the people uh, that are underneath the ruler. But the shadow side of the ruler is the tyrant or the bully or the despot or somebody who rules with the iron fist. And so you can sort of explore, if you are somebody who's in kind of leadership positions, then you probably have the ruler as one of your archetypes. So you can also explore what happens when you see yourself going into the kind of darker side of that archetype. Another archetype that people may carry is the mother. And the mother does not have to be an archetype just for women or those who consider themselves women. This can also have different offshoots, like the father can be a mother archetype in some ways, or have a similar role, like the caregiver. That would be another way to say it. So the caregiver, the mother, is somebody who is nurturing, right, and accepting and loving and unconditionally loving, right? But on the shadow side of it, the mother can be devouring or withholding or even abusive. And so if you consider the mother to be one of your archetypes, you can play with that idea of when have I drifted over that line into the shadow side of that archetype and what can I learn from that? So if you're able to identify which of these archetypes operate in you, then you can explore those in your shadow work. This is something that we also do in Shadow Seekers. And Andrea had left a question about some of the archetype work that we've done. We've worked with the survival archetypes, which are the the prostitute, the saboteur. I'm blanking on all of them right now. The victim and the child. And we all carry all of those. And so they will kind of drift into their more shadow sides. And we've also worked with, we're actually going to be working with the creative archetypes very soon. So we do this kind of work in our Shadow Seekers membership. So if archetypes is something that you want to work on, the membership could be a good place for you. But you can also Google archetypes and shadow work and start to study it that way as well. But to answer Andrea's question, yes, we're going to be continuing and doing more archetype work in the future, including in just a couple of months. So another thing we can do is ritual. So ritual is typically performed differently if we are doing it for a shadow work as the intention. So I like to cast my shadow work circles in the counterclockwise way instead of casting them clockwise. I like to call my quarters backwards when my intention is shadow work. So I like to start in the center. If you don't have center as part of the elements, then you would start in the north and you would call them going the other way, going counterclockwise around the circle. To me, I like doing it this way because it sets this type of ritual apart as different, has a different intention. I also, what I think is, as we go counterclockwise, it's like we are descending down into the unconscious, which is where we need to be if we want to do shadow work. During these rituals, you can work with darker deities or deities of the underworld, like Hecate is very good for shadow work. Inanna, Ereshkigal, Inanna's sister, Caradwyn, Persephone, Odin, the Morrigan. These are just a few. Lilith is another good one. But these are just a few of the many that you could work with. You can work with any deity in shadow work. Sometimes people just feel a little bit more drawn to kind of the darker ones or the ones that have connection to the underworld, because really from a shadow work perspective, the underworld is your unconscious anyway. During your shadow work rituals, you can ask for guidance on your shadow work from either the deities, from your guides, from your own higher self. You can do divination. You can pull a card to represent your shadow. You could study that card and try to understand what it could be saying about your shadow. Perhaps pull a second card of how it can integrate, or how you can heal that aspect, or how you can integrate it back into your own personality. You can do releasing spells. So if you find that there are like emotions that you are holding on to about some of this that are not serving you, sometimes we hold those emotions in our emotional body. We can hold them in our energetic body or even in our physical body as like kinks and tension in the body. So we can release that during shadow work rituals. We can do energy balancing. So you can do some breath work, some chakra work. So there's a lot of options. I really think as witches, we have this really powerful ability to do ritual around anything, and it just allows us a physical way to sort of represent what we're trying to do. Um, the next idea, just a couple more ideas, and then we'll go to the Q&A, is letter writing. Now, letter writing could be part of that shadow work ritual. You could use that as part of the center, or it can just be its own practice. So in shadow letter writing, we write a letter to the parts of ourselves that we have been struggling to accept, or the parts of ourselves that we're upset about or we're angry at. You allow yourself to express any feelings that you need to, any feelings of fear or resistance or shame. You just really get it all out. How are you feeling? And then what you do after you've done all of that is you write a compassionate response back to you from a place of self-love. So you could imagine the higher self returning, giving the response back out of understanding and non-judgment, right? And so sometimes people can feel this back and forth dialogue between the shadow and the higher self can be very cathartic and very healing. So you can do that as part of a larger ritual, or literally just do it as a simple practice. Light a candle, burn some incense, and then sit down and kind of write to your shadow, and then write back to your shadow, respond to your shadow. Or I guess write. You can even write as your shadow, right? Or you can write to your shadow. So there's a lot of opportunities and ways that we can do this. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about is ancestral shadow work. So we have the ability to kind of explore our own stuff, but we also tend to carry stuff that's not ours as well. We carry stuff from our ancestral line. So some of the stuff you'll notice when you do your shadow work, you'll trace it back kind of just to your own childhood. You'll work through it. You'll gain some freedom through that. Sometimes you'll trace it all the way back to a past life. And in a similar idea, you will kind of work through it. You'll gain some freedom through doing that. Sometimes the things that we're carrying are also ancestral, which means that they've been passed down to us from generation to generation. So if you want to do ancestral shadow work, you're going to want to explore your family lineage. And if you are adopted, you can explore your adopted family lineage as well, because the transmission, in one respect, we can say the transmission kind of comes to us genetically, but on the other respect, the stuff that gets passed down to us also comes through just interactions with people. So even your adopted family is passing things down to you. You are linked to that family very deeply, and so you're going to be influenced by any of their ancestral lineage shadow work as well, or baggage that's coming down to you. So what you want to mainly do here is look for generational patterns or traumas that may be influencing your own shadow work. So are you carrying any ancestral burdens that are not your own? So sometimes what will happen is people will feel like, I have this thing, kind of this way of being, It doesn't quite feel like mine. Sometimes you'll be very clear. Yes, that's my stuff. I know where it came from. But sometimes it's like I'm carrying this thing and it just doesn't quite feel like mine. So it's possible that it could be ancestral. So you want to look back through your lineage. You're looking for patterns like mental health issues that seem to be carried from one generation to the next. Suicides. If there are a lot of suicides in the family line that come down through different generations, that would be another place to explore. Infidelities, thefts in the family, abuse. So anywhere that you see these patterns, great fears, that's one that got passed down from my family and my maternal side. There's just a lot of fear that my mom carries and that I know that my grandma carried. And I didn't know my great grandmother, but I would like to do some more research into that, to see what I can find out about her. But these fears don't seem to quite be mine. That's how I sort of tapped into this. And as I started to explore backwards, I started to notice these patterns coming down through the different generations. So once you start to see a pattern like that, then you can perform rituals to release these ancestral barriers or these ancestral burdens that you are carrying. Because again, these really aren't yours to carry. In many ways, you can also, when you do this ritual to kind of release them, you can release them from the entire family line. And in that respect, you can begin to heal not just you personally and not just the people who come after you, but also the entire line going backwards in time as well. So it can be very, very powerful. In, I think, October or November, we're going to be doing some ancestral shadow work in our Shadow Seekers membership. So if that's something you're interested in and you're not a member yet, it would be a good time to join us before October or November. All right, so I am going to let's see here. So I'm going to talk about the benefits of shadow work, and then I'm going to shift over into the Q&A and we'll answer a few questions, okay? So I promised that I promised at the beginning that I would talk about some of the benefits. I think it's important for us to talk about the benefits because shadow work can be tough. It can be, something, it can be very intense. It can feel kind of lonely at times as you start to change. You're changing the way that you're being, and other people around you are not necessarily changing. So it can feel very isolating at times. So it's important for us to remember and remind ourselves about the benefits, like the fact that regular shadow work, can lower your anxiety and can alleviate depression. It can help you to lessen your self-doubt. You'll find that your self-belief can be amplified just through just through doing this kind of work regularly. You'll find wholeness and more peace, better relationships with yourself, better relationships with others, better ways of communication. And then there are all the spiritual benefits that, honestly, when I first started doing shadow work, it was to heal myself, the emotions that were coming up after I um, had an ectopic pregnancy, and I had a life-saving surgery afterward to save my life. Um, Physically, I bounced back quickly. Emotionally, I did not. And so I started to engage in a lot of shadow work just to heal that. But what I noticed is it had these spiritual implications. I found that it deepened my intuition. Shadow work can strengthen your magical abilities because, again, you're releasing that sort of energy that is, you're spending all that kind of unconscious energy keeping the shadow out in fringes, away from you. Once you release that, you have this energy for other things. It was just naturally, I found that it strengthened my ability to arrive in a circle and do rituals. I found a better connection to the higher self. And so this is why I say that shadow work is truly alchemical. It really does turn kind of the mundane into gold in a lot of ways. But it is intense work. So it is okay, and it is recommended to have a therapist, at least on call, somebody that you can reach out to if you need support on your shadow work journey. Finding a mentor or a guide can be very helpful. Finding a group like ours. Shadow work is not necessarily a substitute for therapy, but it is a complement. And some people do some really, really great work. It, like I said, it can really accelerate the pace of your healing when you're doing this kind of work. So it's important to remember the good things, right? The goals of why we're doing this, because again, it can be intense. So it is always good to have somebody that you can reach out to. And it is the point of why we have our big free group and also why we have our membership, is so that people do feel supported on the journey. Okay, so I'm going to shift over into the Q&A now. So if there's anything you guys want to ask, you can put it in the chat. If you're with us live, put questions in the chat. It can be about anything related to witchcraft, shadow work, or energy work. If you're watching back in replay, you can leave questions too. I'll go back through the feed after the videos and I'll answer anything I wasn't able to answer during the recording. So I am going to start with a question that Nancy left. And she had said, and that will give people time to put them in the chat. Nancy said that just when I think my past and negative thoughts are far behind me, why do they come back? How do you keep them away? So it's a very good question. Nancy's somebody who's been she's done shadow work for a while. She's been in the group for since near the beginning of it. And so it can be disconcerting when you've done this work and you feel like it comes back, like you thought it was gone and it comes back. So the important thing to remember about spiritual work is that it is cyclical instead of linear. So we do have to remove the expectations that we have sort of placed on us. This isn't like patriarchal time where it's very linear, right? You start at A and you go to Z. You heal in kind of this linear way in patriarchal time, but in more spiritual time, you heal in a cyclical way, which means that you will heal. You'll feel kind of like you're healing, you're making progress, and you'll sort of go along your way. And eventually, the important thing to remember is you're always kind of spiraling upwards towards spiritual evolution, but you do sort of return back to certain places as the spiral sort of comes back around on itself. And situations may pop up that trigger you or bring back negative emotions that you thought that you had healed. So it's really important to manage your expectations about that. Know that when you return to these negative feelings, you are doing so from a more elevated place. That's the important thing for you to remember. It is sometimes people get they despair because they're like, I did all this work and now I'm back to square one. You're not back to square one. You did all that work. It's returning back to you, perhaps so that you can see it from a different perspective. Perhaps there's still more work to be done at a higher level that you've now reached, and you are able to deal with it at a higher level now. So it can feel, I know how it feels. It feels bad. But if you can think of it in this way, you can shift your perspective and look at it, well, actually, I'm more elevated now. Now I can deal with it from a higher perspective. I can start to heal it from that higher place. Then it can feel not so bad, right? I think the other thing that to remember is that the goal of shadow work is not necessarily to get rid of all the negative thoughts. The goal is to shift your perspective of the negative thoughts. So even with years and years of shadow work, it's not that the person is never going to feel negative thoughts or negative feelings. It's that they may not be quite as bothered by them anymore. That's certainly what I notice. It's not like all the bad stuff goes away. It's just that it's like it doesn't faze me quite the same. And other people who, have done a lot of shadow work will say something similar. It's just, I'm not as irritated by the things that used to bother me. So it is important to kind of remember that. The goal isn't to get rid of the negative thoughts necessarily, but to shift your perspective about them. So my advice to you, Nancy, and to anybody who's feeling this way is to, kind of put it in perspective. Know that you've been doing your work. This is an opportunity for you to continue that work, kind of looking at it from a higher perspective when the negative feelings return, and kind of return back to your shadow work for that thing. And I'm sure just because you were able to do it the first time, you'll be able to do it again. You'll be able to move through it, right? And now you will have found greater healing at an even greater level. So I hope that helps. And then Andrea had asked another question about a source to study constellations. And I don't really have a good source. So I'm wondering if anybody in the chat, either live or later, has any sources for Andrea about where do you study constellations or learning about the different constellations. So if anybody's got any sources for her, that would be great. And I'm sure other people would benefit from those as well. Okay, so I'm just going to move kind of backwards. I'm going to see if there's anything that I've missed. Okay, so Kurt had said, what archetype would cover having a fear of something? I'm not entirely sure that there is a specific archetype that would have to do with having a fear of something. That it may be that like if you can be more specific about the fear, that will kind of link it better to a specific archetype. The shadow side of any archetype could carry fears. So that's where it's like the question's a little too general to answer. But if there's a specific fear, we might be able to get a better answer. Amy asked if there's a shadow work ritual in the portal. We have a couple. There's like some dark moon releasing rituals there. But probably we'll do another. I keep adding, like, I like to have some general shadow work rituals in the Shadow Seekers membership. So I'm going to continue adding to those. But there are a couple that are called dark moon releasing ceremony. There's a dark moon releasing ritual, and those can work really good as like generic shadow work rituals. Sonia said she recently learned this when her aunt on her adopted father's side was the person who answered with a reading. Oh, I'm not sure if you're referring to. Oh, I'm not sure what. Oh, did you learn something about like ancestral, like shadow work? Probably is what you meant. Yeah, it can be really, it can be eye-opening when we start to like see the stuff that's carried down through the different ancestral lines and then descends down to us. Stephanie said alcoholism is in the ancestral line. Yeah, exactly. So that would be something to explore. Anytime we see a pattern coming down through that ancestral line, it's something for us to explore. Andrea said, due to my shadow work, I'm actually starting to feel more whole and actually enjoy my alone time, which I never did before. Yeah, you shift a lot in the way that you feel. Things that you might have kind of made you nervous or worried or anxious in the past no longer do. People who do a lot of shadow work, they do find that they shift a lot. Like the things that worried them don't, it's not that everything just goes away, but it's just that you're not quite as worried or anxious about things anymore. I also noticed a very similar thing is that I enjoyed my alone time much more. I always enjoyed alone time, but I enjoyed it much more when I was doing when I began doing a lot of shadow work. Stephanie said shadow work is ongoing through our lives is what I'm getting. Yeah, it's a process that doesn't really, I mean, it's the process of soul evolution. And soul evolution isn't something that we kind of just do for a bit and then it stops. It's something that we're always doing. So we'll notice that it returns back to us over time. Lessons will return. We're from a higher perspective. We begin to deal with them at that more elevated level. But yeah, it's an ongoing process for sure. Same with energy work. And then Chelsea said, Kairos is sacred time, Chronos is linear time, embrace the Kairos. Yeah, so it's like that, it's that space outside of time and space. It's like time can feel like it slows down. It's just a different feeling of when we're in that kind of like non-linear space. Shannon said she wants to thank me for the useful information and answers to many questions I've had and have that you give, and for the time you put into this. Greatly appreciate you. You're welcome, Shannon. Of course. I'm glad that I can do these. I love doing these live, so I'm just glad that people are really getting a lot out of them too. Andrea said her accountability group wanted to learn about constellations. Yeah, I don't necessarily, I feel like an app could help you. I mean, I studied them back in college. I did a lot of like astronomy classes, but I don't have any good sources to recommend right now. Kurt said fear of heights was what he was thinking about with any archetype that could help with the fear of heights. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but when people ask questions like that, then I like to contemplate them, and I'm going to come up with an answer for you eventually. But let me kind of think about it, which archetype would be best for working with fear of heights. Amy said, can you repeat the yin yoga you mentioned? I'm not sure what you mean by that. So there are yin yoga videos in the Shadow Seekers membership. Right now, they're in the Facebook group guide section 3, and they're all labeled as yin yoga. But if I'm misunderstanding the question, let me know. I'm not sure what you were asking about. Okay. Chelsea said regarding heights for Kurt, she said, I would look into what specifically you're afraid of, jumping, falling, what. You might point to, that might point you to a specific archetype or deity that could help. She said she's also afraid of heights. Yeah, so not doing the, if you could look at it from other perspectives besides the archetype as well, kind of looking at, can you trace it back? Just like anything with your shadow work, can you trace it back to where the fear comes from? So the fear of heights is natural for us. Just kind of like the same, like a lot of the phobias that people have, they come from natural responses to things that can be harmful. If we didn't have a fear of heights, that'd be very dangerous, right? But then it can become more debilitating for people. So it would be good to trace it back to, like, can you trace it back in this life? And then I also recommend considering past life stuff too. So sometimes when people have great fears like that, I always think it's worth considering past lives. Because I was able to, like, I have this fear of kind of putting my head underwater, even though I like immersing my body. I really can't stand putting my head underwater, and I was able to trace that back to a past life. Oh, Amy wanted to know the names of the instructors for Yin Yoga. Yes, it is Brett Larkin. Afterwards, I'll type these into the chat too. Brett Larkin Yoga. And then the other one is Yoga with Cassandra, or it might be Yoga by Cassandra. You should be able to find those. And then Chelsea said DK makes good informational books. Yeah, so they would probably have a good one on constellations. And then she said also check out the Griffith Park Observatory website. Good. Those are good ideas. That's why I love the chat too, because people are helping each other as well. Awesome. Okay, so if anybody's got any more questions, anything to add, you can drop it in the chat now. Of course, anybody watching in replay, you can put things in the chat as well. Let me tell you about what's coming up. So next week on 4/1, we're going to have an episode on different types of witchcraft. And then on 4/8, we'll have an episode on working with elemental guardians. Then on 4/15, we have an episode on working with the root chakra. So one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm going through like really old episodes that have poor sound quality and video quality, and I'm making them better. I'm adding new information to them. And so I'm in the process. I'm getting near the end of this, and then I'm going to have a whole series of new episodes coming out in the summer. But those are the next 3 coming. For those who've been waiting, the long-awaited return of Demystifying Witchcraft, or I guess the inaugural round of it in the public, Demystifying Witchcraft is our comprehensive course on witchcraft. It is the trainings that I use to train our in-person coven, and it's also used to train our new online coven as well. So that course will be coming out in mid-April in just a few weeks. It'll be for the first time that the public will be able to purchase it. Up until now, it's only really been available to those in Shadow Seekers. So this course is very comprehensive. It goes through all different kinds of things, like from working with the elements to working with the deities to sabbats and esbats to spell work to the science of magic. We are continuing to add to the course. In the future, there will be new modules that will be added. And the beautiful part about the course is if you buy it, at any point when you buy it, you never pay again. Whatever gets added to it is yours for free in the future. So More information will be coming out as we get closer to mid-April, and then you'll be able to make a decision if the course is the right course for you. That course is also comes with an invitation to join our online coven at the end of the course. You can also just take the course if you want to take the course and have no interest in the coven as well. And then our Shadow Seekers membership will be reopening in May, sometime in May. And our Shadow Seekers membership is where you can do more of this stuff. We do monthly kind of shadow work workshops and energy work workshops. We do rituals. We have office hours where people can just hang out and share and get help and support. And we have a ton of other features in the membership. So if that's something you're interested in, that will be opening up soon as well. All right, so if there are any other questions, drop them in the chat. And I don't see any other questions though, but if I've missed any questions, I will be going back through later and I will make sure I answer anything I missed. So if you are, whether you're watching us live or you're watching us in replay, go ahead and drop a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the video if you haven't already done so. That helps us get this out to the feed of more people. If you have not signed up for our mailing list yet, or the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work, I'm going to drop a link here in the chat right now. For anybody who hasn't signed up, you can sign up there. That'll put you on our mailing list, so you'll get the replays of all of these Ask Aislin videos sent to you every week, plus other information about different topics related to shadow work, witchcraft, and energy work. And you'll also get the free copy of the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work. If you are watching back on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to our Body, Mind, Witchcraft YouTube channel, and that way you will not miss any future episodes. We are nearly at 1,000 subscribers, which will open the doors to being able to monetize the channel. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and you will help us out greatly. All right, well, I always enjoy spending these Tuesday nights live with people, so thank you for coming and joining us and being part of the lively chat. And if you're watching back in replay, we appreciate you too as well. So happy waning crescent moon as we move into the balsamic tomorrow. See if you can use this time to do some of this work. See if this episode opens up anything for you. All right, until next time, blessed be.